Hello there, darling. Welcome to my garden. It is September 1st. This place is a complete and total wild and wonderful wreck, and I can't wait to spend the afternoon in it with you. I'm hearing some thunder in the distance, so we'll see how far we get into this. I hope that I'm able to fully get it done. This is the time of year where in the Midlands of South Carolina we get random unforecasted thunderstorms because of the heat, and I guess it has something to do with our proximity to the coast. I don't know, but it's very normal for us to get like 10-minute downpours in the middle of the afternoon here. Now, admittedly, I haven't shot a ton of content in my garden over the last few weeks because this is the time of year that I kind of just let it go. I start gearing towards the fall and focus on what I'm going to be planting next. And I still do come to my garden to harvest, but I'm not really trying to tame anything, to maintain anything. The biggest task, I guess, that I have on the garden to-do list this time of year is resetting spaces for fall and harvesting what I can of the dwindling summer garden. So if you are by chance finding me off this video, hi, my name's Jess, and I love sharing growing food with people. That's what I do here on my channel, Roots and Refuge Farm. This is my little buddy Bear here, who is always underfoot. He's going to be panting throughout this entire video because it is very hot today. We had a little taste of fall a couple of weeks ago. We're back into full-blown summer, and frankly, the garden is still growing like wild. And while it does admittedly make me cringe a little bit to come out here because I see all the messes. Hold on. I also know that sharing this wonderfully wild garden with you all, from your point of view, it doesn't look like a massive to-do list. It's actually probably fairly magical. What are you doing, guys? All right, back to the garden. The animals had knocked the hose off their trough and it was empty, and what I was hearing was one of the horses was hitting her hoof inside the trough, like, where's the water? They're good now. All right, so one look here at the cottage garden is wild and overgrown as it is. In here, I would say probably the most notable thing that I'm harvesting anything from is I have all of this mint, which it has mostly died back at this point to be pretty low growing, but it's spread all throughout here. I'm still harvesting mint. I've mostly been using it for tea and adding mint leaves into tea. However, I add mint into other recipes sometimes too. So that was an accident. This was something that had reseeded and took over this whole section of my garden, but I didn't actually hate it. It was a little cumbersome. It was a little bit overbearing, as mint is. It's such a bully, but I've used a lot of it. I took a lot of it to the farmer's market this season. My fountain broke this year. That's something that we need to fix, but we're gonna fix it with like a more permanent solution. So it's dry right now. And you know, at this time of the last couple of years, I've said I want to rework this space because it is such a mess. But in the springtime, I absolutely love it, and I think I don't want to rework it at all. Right here, I have a couple of garden beds, and actually seeing these reminds me. So I ordered these beds. They just came in. I haven't set them up yet. These are some more round beds for me to do my Jerusalem artichokes in. I'll show you guys that in a second. But Birdie's Beds through Botanical Interest is having a really big sale this weekend for Labor Day, and they have a lot of their garden beds on sale for bundles that are essentially buy two, get one free, which is a really good deal. Their beds are the metal ones that last for a really long time, and if you're wanting to do a raised bed garden but you don't have a handy husband that can build you all of the raised garden beds, I put these together myself, and I don't have any problem with that. So I'll put a link down below. It is an affiliate link. I really appreciate when y'all use my affiliate links. It does help me do what I do, and I am also very mindful that if I'm going to promote anything for you to spend your hard-earned money on, it's something that I would also spend my hard-earned money on. So the link's down below. Their sales going on this weekend. Definitely check it out because it is a great time to be able to expand your growing space. I got some round beds. I have one more of the boxes up by my house because I'm going to set it up here. I only needed two down here. So I brought these down, and I got the mist green color because green's my favorite color. Yeah, so the cottage garden, oh, I did have one thing over here I want to show y'all. First off, there's random asparagus growing everywhere. That's just all over my farm. But this I found hilarious. I noticed this the other day when I was out here. I've got watermelons growing here. Yep, that's the only one I've seen. Maybe there's another one that snaked its way underneath these big plants, but I thought that was so funny. So on that side of the cottage garden, I have my 3 48-foot beds that have all the tomatoes in them in the shade cloth, which the tomatoes are pretty well done at this point. And here, I'm gonna make my way through here. All of this was volunteer, this celosia. I had a green stalk here a couple of seasons ago that had celosia in it, and there's been celosia growing here since then. Did y'all know that coxcomb is also what it's called sometimes? This is edible. I have tried it. I'm not telling you that it's great, but you can eat it. All right, so this is my Jerusalem artichoke situation. You can see they're blooming in a lovely way. I'm gonna put 2 more round beds right here and put more Jerusalem artichokes in them. I really like how this looks. I mean, it's wild and crazy. We did do like a little bit of a panel. That's actually a hog panel around here to help support them so they wouldn't be laying all over. But Jerusalem artichokes are a really great food source. They're extremely productive. And my hope with these 3 beds, I'm gonna take these, harvest everything that's under the ground, that's the tubers you harvest, and then expand them into the other 2 beds so that they'll all 3 look like this next year. And then I'm going to harvest all of those, and my plan is to plant them along like the tree line of my property, just for some, you know, fast growing, lovely looking food they can grow in the fringes. So a lot of these spaces are just really wild. Things like this bed, this is all mint. This is the parent bed from where my mint hostile takeover started. This is my Nanking cherries, which these have already fruited. At the end of the season, I'll cut them back. The asparagus beds, those have already gone through all of the harvest that we're going to do. And at the end of the season, like, they'll die back when it frosts. And I'll cut them all down and they'll come up again next year. This bed is rough. This is chamomile, and it always reseeds. So next year this bed will be full of chamomile again. So I just don't plant anything in it in the non-chamomile season. Here are my eggplants. And a lot of this you'll notice in the garden today. I mean, you're going to see a lot of fruit that is spoiled, which is actually one of the reasons I don't really love showing my garden this time of year. And I mentioned this in a recent video, but I get a lot of flack for the amount of food that I let go to waste in my garden spaces at the end of the season. People are like, you should donate that. And the truth is, I'm just covered up. I don't have time to come out and spend time harvesting and time driving and time taking it. I do let multiple friends come and harvest things out of my garden, and I still come out and harvest things as I need them. But typically once September rolls around, I'm gearing into the next season. My children are getting a lot of my attention, and it's okay. It really is okay. I know that it's a weird thing to think, oh, that food is wasted. That food exists because I planted it. And right now, in my mind, if it's going back into the soil, or if I'm going to grab those plants off at the end of season, throw them to my pigs, throw them to my chickens, that's not wasted. That's all pouring back into the cycle and recycling of energy on my farm. And that's okay. But I recognized recently that I was shying away from showing it because of the extreme amount of criticism I get on that. It's interesting because I wonder how many people are looking at those comments and feeling shame themselves because of the stuff that's going bad in their garden. I remember years ago my mother coming to my house in, August, September, and she was like, Jess, you have so much stuff in your garden. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. It's fine. And I hadn't even been out there in like a week or two. And she was like, let's just go see. And we ended up going out there and harvesting everything we needed for that evening. And I thought, I wonder if I could just approach the garden casually this time of year. When it's so wild, it's overwhelming. If I could just go out and get what I need for today. And that is my approach to the wild garden. When it goes completely crazy and there's no chance of taming it, I just come to get what I need today. And if I decide I have a canning recipe that I want to try, I may go out and see if I can gather enough to do that recipe. But I'm really just looking for today's provision, and this wild garden provides it. So here I have quite a few eggplants in this bed. I put these canna lilies in this and they never really took off. You know, sometimes it's that way with pots, especially if you don't fertilize them, and I haven't fertilized this one. So I'm probably going to move those down by the pond where they'll thrive and put something different there next year. Right here on this trellis, I have lots of beans, which I've just left them on to dry. Well, that one didn't develop any beans. Here we go. Okay, I've got some butter beans. I'll put those in my pocket. That's what this whole trellis is. And I've just left them to dry, and I can harvest them dried, shell them all at my leisure, and save them in a jar for whenever I want to rehydrate them and cook them. Sunflowers. One thing I'm hoping to address before next year is I really want to do something with my walkways. I dealt with a lot of weeds coming up along the edge this year, and so I'm hoping to kind of push the gravel back and deal with any holes, as well as finish graveling once I put these other beds in. We didn't finish graveling here because I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I think 3 of those is going to look really awesome. There are a lot of butter beans out here. This is a local heirloom that we planted, and it's kind of all over the place, but I've just been letting it dry. Here's my basil bed. I have about a gallon of dried basil inside that I freeze dried, which will be plenty to get me through the winter. And the rest of this I just let go to seed because it makes the bees happy. And this is holy basil, so we can still harvest off of this. Dead squash. Right here, these are chicken and dumplings cowpeas, which I've got a whole field of them down on the end we'll get to. We threw some in here. And I typically let these peas dry on the plant. I have a couple recipes that I'll pick some for while they're still soft, but mostly I let them dry and wait until they're fully dried out and harvest them, and then I just shell these beans and store them in a jar, and when I want to cook them I just soak them overnight and cook them the next day. Here are quite a lot more butter beans. Let's see here, a little garden ASMR. That's lovely, huh? So in this bed, this has probably been my most frequented bed this last few weeks. I've come out here multiple times and harvested lots of green beans that I just take in and cook for dinner. I haven't done a ton of preserving of these. I've been mostly just eating them fresh, but there's still lots of green beans out here. This is the bitter melon, which I've pretty well quit harvesting this, and there are quite a few on here that will get really big. This volunteered this year and I just let it grow. We grew it last year and I wasn't like wild about it, but I think bitter melon's probably a pretty acquired taste. It's very popular in a lot of Asian cooking, but it's kind of neat. It's a novelty. I love the plant. It's lush. Let's see, I've got a few squash plants. These are starting to get powdery mildew. This is one that I've been harvesting off of, but I think its time is coming to an end. This is parsley. I cannot believe that it is still growing, but I've harvested it almost to the ground multiple times, and I assume that's probably why it hasn't gone to seed. The flavor at this point is pretty dang pungent, but I have been harvesting it and using it in recipes. Over here, look at this. Told you I'd show you all the wildness. This is bitter melon that has snaked its way all the way from there down here. Purple butterfly peas, so lovely. That's one plant. It's taken over that whole thing. One thing with the kind of late break in the weather, a lot of my strawberries started to bloom again after that cool week. Look at this craziness. Sweet potato vine. It's magical. It's doing everything I hoped it would. I just love wildness in the garden. This is a basil plant called Perpetua. This is a hybrid that does not go to seed. If you want more of these, you have to propagate them. And so it's massive. It still tastes really well. It is kind of spicy. As far as basil profiles go, some of them are on the sweeter side. This one is definitely on the spicier side. So here, I've got a mix of things. I've got some green beans that are growing. That has made its way over from here, from this. These are Seychelles green beans. I love this variety. It has been really enjoyable. They stay tender for a really long time, and they're just thin. I like thin green beans more than I like the real thick flat pods. And this is a thin pole bean. A lot of times the thin, more like French varieties are bush. I had a viewer come out to our farmer's market and bring me those seeds. I planted them on that, and right now it's harvest time. Probably if I keep harvesting those, probably they will keep producing until close to the frost. I don't know. It's September 1st now, and we won't get frost for about 2 months on average. So that's still a lot of growing time. I may still plant some squash and stuff like that, like in places that we're renewing. But in the raised bed gardens, I'm not currently planting anything. Our plan for this fall is to kind of regroup. The garden got a lot bigger than I really want it to be. I was growing a lot and giving it away, but I don't need that. Even with a small garden that is very well managed, you can have excess. And so I'm actually reining a lot of spaces in. So this fall, when everything in this raised bed garden that I'm showing you right now dies, we're actually resetting. I'm going to take everything out. I'm going to take the trellises down. I'm going to heavily mulch and I'm going to add more soil compost, and then heavily mulch and let it rest over winter and start fresh in the spring with a little bit of a different layout, and yeah, make the most of the raised bed garden. It's wild. These are like 10 feet tall tomato plants, still blooming. A lot of disease, but I haven't really been doing anything with it. Mostly, I've just been coming out and harvesting what I want to eat fresh. I've not been trying to make any big harvest. So you'll see that there's a good deal of fruit. It's like spoiled, which is fine. I've put up as much as I want to, and I'm okay with letting some stuff go. All right, so a peep under the shade cloth. We're on the other side of the cottage garden now, and this is where all my tomato beds are. A lot of the tomatoes at this point, there's not a ton on them. When it's over 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 degrees Celsius, tomato plants drop their blossoms. So we have this unusual period, kind of in the in-between of the garden season, where tomatoes don't set a lot of new fruit. Now, if you can keep your plants healthy enough, when the weather does begin to cool off, they'll start setting new blossoms. So you can see here, I've got some new tomato blossoms actually on these plants. I'll probably be tearing them out before they produce a whole lot more. As it is, I've had a handful of fruits here and there, just enough for fresh eating for the last couple of weeks. The last like really big tomato harvest I got was probably 4 weeks ago, and now we've come into the point that the fruit is few and far between. When there is fruit, a lot of the times the pest pressure is so hard that I don't get a lot. For me, where I'm growing, middle June through late July is really like my hard and heavy tomato season. Now over on this side, these are all Mexican sunflowers. So this was something that was Will's idea, and I thought it was really cool. So Mexican sunflowers are really great plants that mine nutrients, pull a lot of stuff up, and so all of these are going to get chopped and dropped so that when we let them grow, they grow really deep. They grow past these beds into the ground, and then we cut them off at the surface and just lay them down in the bed to feed the soil. So this is future soil health right here, and all of this is just wild and wonderful. One of my favorite places to be in the garden is actually right down here. I've got my little fish tank right here with my mosquito fish in it. That's a trough that has some aquatic plants on top, and it has lots of fish in there. And they keep having babies, which is really cool. This is volunteer celosia. That's all over the place. And I like to sit just right here, especially now that the Mexican sunflowers. This is pretty great. So my plan for next year is to grow tomatoes again in these beds. I still do have some other things here that I'm harvesting. This is the basil that I've pretty heavily pruned. This one hasn't fully gone to seed. The shade cloth makes a pretty big difference in the basil. This one's kind of trying, but I keep pulling it. I've hacked this plant back at least halfway, probably 4 or 5 times too. This shade cloth is 50%. We got this from Grower Solutions, and it is a pretty big game changer when it comes to growing in a hot place like South Carolina. And actually, a lot of people, when they think of season extension, think of like low tunnels and keeping the cold away, but it's just as important to keep the extreme heat away too. And so this area of shade cloth, we didn't put this up until after this was pretty well planted. I think I want to say it was like June that Maya built the shade cloth, which he did put a video over on his Maya's Workshop channel. But I'm curious to see how it goes next year when we can grow entirely under it. I won't be taking these trellises down this winter simply because I know that I'm going to put tomatoes here next year, because this is where the shade cloth is and they desperately need the shade here in South Carolina. But I will be heavily amending these beds. Here I have habanada plants, which is a heatless habanero. This is a great pepper. I've made a few things with these recently. I just love snacking on them. So sometimes I'll have people ask me if I worry about crop rotation. Being in a small garden situation, I don't. In my opinion, if you are building healthy soil and diverse ecosystems, crop rotation is not nearly as necessary as if you are doing some sort of monoculture. So in our commercial agriculture, where we see monocrops where like acres and acres of the same thing are grown potentially year after year, crop rotation is very important in that situation because you have such a draw on the soil with that one particular plant, which takes one particular thing. But like even here, I have the rows of tomatoes, but I have Mexican sunflowers and beans and peppers and eggplants and basils, all these other things in that bed. And then I'm not gardening anything like monocropping. I'm adding compost and I'm adding worm casting teas, and when I pull these plants out, I don't just rip everything out. I actually cut everything off at the surface and leave the root systems in place to break down. So I'm not simply taking from the soil, and though I do grow tomatoes in the same place year after year, because I'm adding back to the soil, I don't think that it's a huge issue. Now some people may beg to differ and argue that repetitive use of the same garden spaces would blight or disease being an issue year after year. But it is September 1st. Let me just tell you what we got going on. And as of this exact moment, it is 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 32 Celsius, and it is currently 58% humidity, which really isn't that bad for around here. If that thunderstorm were to come over, we'd probably spike up to 100%. We're gonna have blight either way. We do burn disease plants. I do the due diligence. I prune with clean shears and all of the different things that you're supposed to do. But frankly, if you live in extremely high humidity places, even if you prune, even if you do the things you're supposed to do, you're still gonna have blight. And so I don't worry so much about rotating my crops because the attempt of avoiding the unavoidable is just not tempting for me. So I set up the shade cloth. I'll probably plant tomatoes there for a very long time, and I think it'll be okay. So this was a potato area. Just recently tilled this under. I'm planning on tarping this, and I'm actually reevaluating this whole big section in between my tunnels and my raised bed garden. We're going to talk about it more soon, but one of the things Maya and I have been really talking about lately is reining back in to just producing what our family needs in a sustainable way, and basically placing sustainability over volume. And with that, it means really heavily cutting down our garden spaces. I've really loved being able to do diverse gardening methods because I like being able to show it to people, but when it turns into chaos, it's probably not teaching us all very much. So one of the things I'm thinking about doing in the garden belt right here is actually creating like a larger pavilion for like a hosting space to be able to hold some classes and stuff. I'm thinking about setting up a more permanent space for chickens. I love having chickens right by my garden because I love feeding them scraps, so like closing that loop. But I just don't need this much space. It's producing so much food that even after taking what we need and even after giving to our animals what excess there is, there's even more. And it's just, I'm realizing that it's kind of expending energy that I don't necessarily want to expend. So kind of reevaluating some things, not in any massive rush. My plan is for all of this, I'm going to let this part, we'll get to this in a moment, I'm going to let this kind of finish everything that it's doing, and then once it's the end of the season, I'm going to put all of this under, tarp it, and then decide what to do, because we don't have to make decisions right away. So right here, the pumpkin patch, my goodness. I'm not going to go off in here. I'm not wearing boots, and so I'm not trying to get snake bit on a YouTube video. There are so many pumpkins on here. We're going to be up to our ears in pumpkins. We're going to have pumpkins to feed our animals for the entirety of the winter, which is great because pumpkins are anti-parasitic and it does animals a lot of good. Chickens, pigs, to give them these. You can even give pureed pumpkin to your dogs. That's good for them, and it helps especially when they have an upset stomach. So having tons of pumpkins, these are Dutch pork pie pumpkins, is not a problem. They go all through here. And this is our Kibler okra, which we have stopped harvesting. You can kind of see all those huge okras on there. We harvested just 5-gallon buckets until we just didn't need it anymore. So let that go. And right now, my main reason for not messing with this is I'm just letting those pumpkins ripen. I'll probably leave this alone until the frost comes, and then I'll come in and gather all the pumpkins up and we'll turn that under. So here in this high tunnel, it's pretty wild. I've got all my peppers. Some I've stopped harvesting. Banana peppers. So there's the thing that happened in the gardening world. It started last year, but it has continued this year. It's been called Peppergate, but there was a mix-up in some major seed supplier. And if you went and purchased started plants and even seeds from some locations, and say you were supposed to be getting jalapenos or bell peppers or whatever, and you ended up with banana peppers, that was Peppergate. There was a massive mix-up apparently on some like national level. It didn't get me much last year because I had started most of my garden last year from old seeds. This year I went to the garden center and bought some plants from where my peppers didn't do great, and I ended up with like 17 plants of sweet banana pepper plants. So I quit harvesting those a while ago. Like, I've got a bunch dried and some canned, and I just don't need any more. Here I've got a massive pumpkin that has worked its way into here. I've got some melons that have snaked over, and mostly in this garden are peppers. And like yesterday, I was cooking, I came out here and harvested a few bell peppers, a couple of hot peppers. I've got a friend coming out in the morning to harvest a bushel of them. He's making some hot sauces and stuff. And he messaged me and said, "Do you have any peppers to spare?" And I said, "Boy, do I." So he's coming over in the morning to harvest. Probably one of my standout peppers for this year is Pippin's Golden Honey. I've so thoroughly enjoyed these. The flavor is fantastic. And it's such a cool plant to grow. They start purple, so they look like this at first, and then they start to turn kind of yellow, and you can harvest them at any point. Like, you could eat them purple, you could eat them yellow, but then they turn this really rich orange like this. And I would say the flavor at this point is like a very sweet bell pepper. It's almost got like a citrusy note to it. They're fantastic. I attempted to grow these for a few years. My plants never did very well, but they've produced like crazy this year. I've been doing this fermented honey thing, and I've been mixing these in with a handful of hot peppers to lend a lot of fruity flavor without a lot of heat. They don't have any heat. And I will say the Pippin's Golden Honey is definitely going on my must grow list. I have enjoyed these probably more than all the other peppers in the garden. Another thing this year that's been interesting, my bell peppers haven't been huge, but they have been really nice. Well, I didn't mean to break that branch off, but like, I've had quite a lot of good sized, not huge, but good sized bell peppers with good thick walls and great flavor. And I'm really glad for that. Sometimes my bell peppers are a little dinky. I do plant my peppers really close together. I plant them like 18 inches apart because in my experience, they like that pretty well. But sometimes the bell peppers end up kind of small, and this year they're not huge, but I mean, that's sizable. That's okay. And the flavor's great. And another one that is really great is the little Pequeño pepper, which I think the name of this means like little beak or something like that. That these are so cool. They look like they'd light you up, but they're not hot. They're extremely fruity, and they have just the tiniest touch of heat. And I have a good sized jar of these in the fridge right now that I did like a quick pickle and just put them in the fridge, because I just think these are, one, really adorable, but two, with the quick pickle, there's a gourmet grocery store over in Columbia, kind of near the college where my son goes, and they have these little tiny jars of these, and it's like $8 for a little, like, few ounce jar. So I did like a quart jar. It made me feel bikini pepper rich. These pickled are really nice to throw on a sandwich, or just to add a pop of like brightness and acidity to something that needs to be cut. And they're also really adorable. They're great on charcuterie boards too. So I probably won't do a whole lot in this space until closer to the frost. I still have melons ripening. Here you can see. There's still just a lot going on out here. I'm coming out here very regularly and harvesting, so there's no reason to really tear this out. The thing is, with being in mild South Carolina, we do freeze here. And we freeze pretty hard. But even in our winter, we still have a good deal of sun. Things will grow slow, but they'll still grow. I could come in here in October and start clearing this stuff out, amending the beds, and I could still plant fall crops in October. And I might not harvest those until March of the following year, but I would still harvest them. So I'm not in any rush to do anything in this space. And by waiting, I mean, I can get more watermelons. I can still get lots of peppers. I've got pumpkins taking over in here, and I'm not mad about it. Now, this is the area where we're primarily concentrating on resetting right now. This is where we're currently beginning to sow to prepare for, you know, fall harvests. Some of these beds are not sown yet. We're just beginning to reset them. This was flowers, and you can see there's still kind of some remaining dahlias in here, but there's also this is all rutabagas. There's some volunteering in the walkways. That all in here, I'm planning on putting roots and brassicas. With the high tunnel, and because we have such mild winters, I'll be able to grow food all over the winter. And between these two tunnels, like this will be the early winter harvest spot, since we're resetting it now, and resetting that one later, that will be the late winter, early spring harvest spot. And primarily for the fall stuff, I'm just direct sowing things. Like I said, there's some things sown in here and more that I'm planning on sowing. And because we have 2 months until our frost, and because it's so warm and sunny here, direct sowing things. There are some things I'll probably have to buy some started plants for, really things that take a long time, like Brussels sprouts, but as it is right now, I'll still be able to get a ton of harvest, especially from the roots and the fast growing stuff that you harvest the leaves of, like kale and all of that. I'll have no problem direct sowing that here in the next like week or two in these spaces, and I'll be harvesting in between 8 and 12 weeks, depending on what it is. Some things probably a little faster, so it's a really quick turnaround. By the time I'm tearing all of this out, that first high tunnel will be, you know, quite giving of food. So yeah, that is my garden right now. Still coming out here daily, kind of picking through the diseased tomato plants to find a tomato here and there, a handful of cherry tomatoes that are usable. Still picking a lot of herbs, the occasional eggplant. Started picking a couple of pumpkins. Old bear dog here had an upset tummy the other day, and I went and grabbed a pumpkin for him. So, you know, we're getting into the fall harvest a little bit. You know, the biggest thing that I have really learned to embrace in gardening is that each season has its strengths, and learning to embrace it for what it gives you is really the best way to garden. I think it's very easy in the winter when you may be picking like a few kale leaves, a little bit of lettuce out of a container, where you're planting a lot. It's easy to wish for the summer, but the winter is when you rest, when you enjoy what you worked for all summer. You know, in the summer, when you're being absolutely inundated with harvest and you're exhausted, it's easy to think of when the work is over. But that's the most lush and beautiful time of the garden. And here in the in-between, when it's wild and crazy, It kind of reminds me of sticking with a friend during a hard season. It might not be the most rewarding for you, but you're going to look back on it with a lot of fondness. And that's why I wanted to shoot this video today, because as much as I come out here and I'm like, oh, there's so much to do, it's such a mess, when I stop and I look at it through the lens, I'm like, wow, that's a lot of beauty. And it makes me think of that time my mom showed up at my house and said, let's go out there and just see. Like, instead of just throwing your hands up entirely, go out there and just see. And for those of you who have 3 feet of weeds in your garden, I bet you'd be surprised at what you could find. Wear boots though, especially if you live where there are snakes. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today and all the days you do. I bless you. Until next time.